Hi, my name is Alyssa. I'm the Executive Director of the Socratic Summer Academy, and I'm here to talk to you today about a couple questions that parents frequently have as they're thinking about SAT prep. One is, how many points should my student aim to improve? And the other is, what is a good score on the SAT? And for a lot of parents, those questions sort of come out of their mouths at the same time. I want to take them apart because how many points should my student aim to improve depends on where he or she is starting and his or her facility with the subject matter. So if you're starting at a 400, it is not realistic to expect to end up with an 800 in 2 weeks. That's crazy talk. It's like losing weight, right? If you want to keep the weight off, you go slow, you lose maybe a pound, 2 pounds a week. Anything else is weight that you'll ultimately put back on. So in order to figure out how many points my students should aim to improve, it's a cocktail of a couple things. How much you already know about the subject matter, right? Specifically reading, writing, and math, how good you are at those things and the way that the SAT tests them, which ought to be separated, which must be separated from how good you are at those things in an objective sense, right? The SAT is testing your facility, your ability to attack the way that it specifically tests concepts. And that doesn't necessarily reflect the way that your student has been trained to think about them in school. Also, the current status of your critical thinking skills. A lot of students go to schools where critical thinking is not a thing that the teachers are encouraging them to do, and that makes it harder to do well in the SAT. So you shouldn't be upset if that is the situation in which you find yourself. Critical thinking, like every other skill, can be grown, and that's a thing that you'll do with your tutor or with the specific strategic plan that you're using to improve your score on the SATs. The third thing that you want to consider is how much test anxiety affects you. Some kids are rock solid in school, but when it comes to the SAT, they just get really nervous. And it makes total sense, right? There's all this information in our culture that implies that the SAT is the predictor of what will happen to you for the rest of your life. And imagine being 17 or 18 and thinking that something you're doing right now is going to decide the rest of your life in capital letters, right? It's like kind of a lot. And so our kids are no less sensitive to that than we would be ourselves when we're taking the test. So the other question that I'm trying to unravel there is, what is a good score on the SAT? And the answer to that is SAT prep is different for every kid, and it depends on where you start. A good score is also the score that will get you into the school that you want to get into. So if you're trying to get into Harvard, that is a different score than the score that you're going to need to get into your local state university. And one score is not better than the other. It is just a score that gets you into the college that you need to get into or that you're trying to get into. The other thing to take into account is personal improvement. If you're starting at a 400, getting a 100-point score improvement might really be a lot for you. If you're making a lot of careless errors and you're getting a 600 and eliminating those careless errors is really tough for you, then again, a 100-point score improvement might be a really lot for you. And I'm not suggesting that there's any world, any universe in which a 100-point score improvement is not a lot, because it certainly is, and it's pretty exciting. But the points obviously get harder to get as you get closer to 800. As I'm sure you know at this point, the SAT is scored on a scale of 200 to 800, and the points, it is easier to go. The points are cheaper in SAT test prep parlance. The points are cheaper at the lower end of the scale. That means that it's significantly easier to go from a 200 to a 400 than it is to go from a 600 to an 800. The SAT grades on a curve, right? And they want very few people to get a perfect score. That way, the perfect score sort of stays something that is noteworthy. Another thing to take into account when you're thinking about what is a good score on the SAT, are you breaking a barrier to scholarship money or college acceptance? The 1,000 barrier, 500 on each section, is pretty important for a lot of colleges, and that sometimes can be the difference between you getting in the pile that gets looked at and getting in the pile that automatically gets discarded. The 1,400 barrier is a difficult one for a lot of kids to break who are trying to get into the upper echelon of their SAT scores. Breaking 700 is seen as a specific type of achievement at a bunch of highly selective schools. So we want to remember when we're talking to our kids about this, not to make too big a deal about their SAT scores. The kids are under a tremendous amount of pressure already to achieve, to succeed, to compete with their peers, and they are, trust me, very worried about doing well. So sometimes well-meaning parents can worry a lot about a child's SAT score, a student's SAT score, and in so doing, make the kid significantly more worried about it. that increases test anxiety, which means that the kid is going to ultimately do worse on the test, which is not what we want. Also, studies have shown that anxiety, the stress hormone cortisol, can cut off some of our higher order critical thinking skills. And if you think of the brain as a specific jar that has a finite capacity, a fixed capacity, if you take some of the water out of that jar, imagine that the brain is a jar filled with water. If you take some of the water out of that jar to deal with test anxiety, I now have less water to deal with the things that are on the test. So we want to make prepping for the test and thinking about the test and having an attitude about the test the most positive experience that we can for our kids. So we want to be always reassuring and remember to set realistic goals. When a kid is starting at a 400, we want to remember to ease him or her up to the 500 level, to the 600 level, to the 550 level. We want to set realistic goals for our kids and also for ourselves and for our own peace of mind.